Welcome back to the Finding Purpose podcast. My name's Adam. I wanted to thank everyone once again for their engagement, for their listens, for just simply being part of the community that I'm trying to build. I'm super grateful for everyone, and please don't ever hesitate to reach out to me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, wherever you can find me, and I'd be happy to set up a conversation with you if you were interested in sharing your story and your journey of finding purpose, which last week, if you listened, we obviously had a real powerful conversation with Vinny Brusco talking about how he jumped into the personal development space, how he launched a space where men can come and be vulnerable and talk about the issues that they are so often bring a lot of discomfort to them. And he's really building something great out there. And I encourage everyone to listen, rate, and review that episode. And, you know, it's a really nice segue into my guest today, Nick Coletti, you know, which I actually met through the podcasting community that we both belong to, Pod Populi. And, you know, we just started talking, and he's the host of the podcast, the Sped Space. And at first I really didn't understand what the Sped Space meant. I thought it was about astronomy, and it is not. It is about a crucial issue that is in every single one of our communities in special education and raising awareness. You know, and we had a great conversation. We talked about, you know, how he kind of jumped into that space here locally in Greenwich. And it only felt right for me to invite you onto my show, Nick. I'm so grateful to have you.
Thank you.
You know, I think the work that you do is amazing. And I really wanted to dig into, you know, your story and what drove you down this path. Because clearly you found a purpose in increasing the public's knowledge in regards to the special education space, and assuming also through your nonprofit, raising funds to help fund programs to directly benefit nonprofit. Am I wrong?
It's not a nonprofit.
Oh, it's not a nonprofit.
No,
okay.
no. The Greenwich Special Education Advocates is my business. And first of all, thank you for having me on here.
Absolutely.
It's my first time being a guest on a show, and I'm very thankful for doing it because now I understand what the guests feel like. Because as the host, I'm always like, "You're fine. No, nothing to worry about." And I've done a bunch of episodes now of my show, and I feel a little nervous right now. It's kind of a weird. I know, and I know not to be, but it's kind of a funny. It's good. It's a good experience.
It's all about perspective, man.
Yeah. So, what I'm doing right now, Greenwich Special Education Advocates, I am an educational advocate. And what that is someone who supports families navigating the special education process. So for those of you that aren't aware or just kind of, you know, don't know so much about special education, it falls under a federal law called the IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And basically, it's the law of the land of how special education is supposed to be conducted, with some other things as well. And there is a whole process to actually get special education services. That can be very convoluted at times and difficult to navigate, just like anything is that you don't know about, right? I mean, I'm not an expert in, like, I would say business in general, right? Like if I needed to go to, I don't know, Wall Street and invest in stocks or cryptocurrency, like that's not my thing. I don't really know much about that. So I would need to talk to somebody, learn about it, and kind of go from there. Special education is much in the same vein that, like, you don't know what you don't know. And I have been working in the field for a very long time. Not that I know everything by any means, but quite experienced in it. And so it's a little easier for me to navigate it.
That's awesome, and it's such honorable work. I want to talk about like early on in your journey, and then what eventually led you to this space. You grew up here in Greenwich?
Yes, born and raised in Greenwich. The first few years I lived in New York, right over the border at Portchester, and then moved here. My family moved here when I was 5, so I started kindergarten right in town, and went through school here. I started off a pretty good student, and then I became a terrible student, like awful. I actually, on my show, I had my English teacher on, who ended up being a coworker when I went back to the school. I failed his class in 8th grade. Like,
that's funny.
Yeah, like, and it was, I failed it. Like, he was a great teacher, one of my favorite teachers, and I failed his class. Like, go figure. So I mean, I had a long journey to actually, you know, getting into college and you know, graduating and everything. But I was not good at school. I got identified myself as requiring special education services when I was in 9th grade. which was great. It was a great help. I struggled with writing. My teachers, Miss A, shout out to Miss A, was my special ed teacher, and had a great team around me, and they helped me with my writing. I didn't really fully understand what was happening at that age, but they helped me with my writing. They helped me with my organization, and it made a big difference. So just having the right teachers in your life was always impactful for me. I mean, I remember, I can think of every like kind of different age bracket for me, a very impactful teacher, a very important teacher in my life, and I loved that. As far as getting into education, I was voluntold when I was a freshman in college or sophomore year to go work at the ESY program, the extended school year program, or summer school, otherwise known as summer school, in town as a paraprofessional, which is an aide. It's a one-on-one person. And I didn't know anything about what I was walking into, but that role is someone who works with kids with special needs. And typically when you're a paraprofessional, you work with some kids that are a little bit more severe on the scope or on the umbrella of special education. And I kind of just fell in love with it. And and honestly, I mean, not to be like, cocky or anything. I was good at it.
Yeah.
Right. And it felt good to be good at something because I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was in college. I was majoring in sociology. Like I wasn't doing anything with that. I liked it. It was interesting, but I wanted to, when I graduated, do something. I needed to do something, and a buddy of mine who I was working with suggested that we become full-time paraprofessionals. So I started working full-time as a paraprofessional, and I do some other things. I do jiu-jitsu, and
nice.
I've been training for a long time.
The second person I've had that does jiu-jitsu.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
In town?
No, guess.
Oh, guess? Yeah.
He's in Westchester.
Oh yeah, I wonder where he trains. It's a small community.
Yeah.
So, do you happen to remember? Did he mention?
I'm not sure. His name's Vinny Brusco. He was my last guest.
That sounds very familiar. Do you remember? Do you know what belt he is? Did you mention?
No.
Okay. But the thing about jiu-jitsu is, you learn how to physically handle yourself, and you learn how to stay calm in stressful situations, and that let me work with the most difficult students. And when I say difficult, I mean the most aggressive students.
Yeah.
So like I've had students that have tried to stab me. I've had students that have tried to like throw me downstairs. I've had students that have headbutt me like in the face. That was the norm for me. Like that was a normal occurrence. Yeah. And because of jiu-jitsu, I was all good. Yeah. And like never got hurt. Nobody ever got hurt. The kids never got hurt. I didn't get hurt. Adults never got hurt. So it was like, it allowed me to excel with a group that was very difficult to work with. Yeah. And it felt good. It felt like I was actually helping these kids when I'm not gonna say like no one else could, but it was very difficult to work with these kids.
I want to jump into something you said earlier that like where at every phase of education you had a teacher that you could identify that you really connected with.
Yeah.
And that's your introduction to the value of education. And so talk a little bit about like the roles that they assumed, even if it was for that one school year, and how you kind of looked up to them and the roles of finding mentorships in schools, because I do believe that teachers are public servants and they're the most precious public servants that we have in our communities as they make sure that our youth are prepared and equipped to just take on the world. And maybe provide a couple of examples of teachers that really had a big impact on you.
Yeah. It's funny reflecting back on that right now. You could see when I did better in school and when I would struggle in school, right? And I can think of like specific grades where like I didn't have that teacher that I connected with and I was just not good that year, I would say the most impactful teacher I ever had is Miss Friedman, and shout out Dr. Friedman, I believe now. She is the electronic music teacher at Greenwich High School. And when I got to high school, I had just failed like multiple classes in 8th grade. It's not the end of the world, but as an educator now, I know that that's kind of an important year. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily go on your record to college by any means, but your 8th grade year kind of dictates what classes you're going to get put into at the high school. It also kind of developmentally is kind of going to show how that kid is going to be, right? Like at 8th grade, I mean, you're 14, potentially 15 at that age, sometimes 13. I mean, it's kind of like starting to get to that point where you kind of need to like lock it in or not. Now, you always have time to change. I did. I did it when I was like 19, right? Like there's always time to change.
Yeah.
But and it's never too late. But you do kind of have to start locking it in. And I was very shy. I was very apprehensive to talk to people. I had a really like odd kind of thing that I thought that everyone was making fun of me when it was just not true at all. But like, if I didn't really know the person, I just would take things personally if they made a joke. So it was tough. And Miss Friedman, Dr. Friedman, she taught electronic music, and I was a big musician. I've been playing music since I was 3.
What do you play?
I don't play as much anymore, but my main instrument is the bass.
Okay.
But I started with the piano, shifted to the bass and the guitar and a little bit of the drums, and had bands pretty much since I started playing. I think I was in a band before I started playing bass.
Nice.
Yeah, I got recruited. They needed a bass player, and that's how I started playing bass.
I'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you play?
No.
No.
I wish I did.
Yeah.
I wish that was one thing that I like. I played sports. I wish I got into more of the arts and music, but
never too late to pick it up.
I know.
It's crazy how much like YouTube has changed the game nowadays.
Yeah.
Like I when I learned how to play guitar and bass, like there was no YouTube.
Well, I look at music as almost like learning a language.
Yeah.
And I would love to. You're right. It's never too late, but it's also very time consuming.
It is.
I got to figure that out. But
if you, of course, in time's a precious commodity, but
Dr. Friedman had a huge impact on that creative side of your.
Well, she that just the existence of that class gave me somewhere to escape to that was productive, right? Because I needed an escape. And that I could have turned to many things, right? I mean, as we all do, right? We turn to things to soothe or to cope or whatever. Thankfully, she had an open door policy. And so whenever I had opens or free time or just frankly after school, I was in that room.
Yeah.
I was in that room and just making music.
Yeah.
That's what it was. It was you had a keyboard, which is it's technically a MIDI controller, but essentially a piano that's connected to the computer. And whatever you put in here has inputs onto the computer, and you just write music.
Dude, I think that's so awesome, and I think it's really important to have a safe space in your school.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to really identify what my safe space was, and the safe space was found in the teachers. Like I had a gym teacher, Mr. Greer, and I would just go to his office, and when I was feeling some type of way or whatever, and I would go to him and confide in him in a certain level. And then there are other teachers that appeared as the journey progressed where I knew that they understood me, or at least, they made an effort to hear me and understand me, and they were empathetic, and having that safe space. Now, as you're in high school, you said you entered 9th grade, and I really want to talk about when you were first offered special education, because I think oftentimes when a student is told that, there's a big stigma around it.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about your personal experience with being integrated into the special education program. And then we could jump into, as a professional, how you deal with that.
So what's really funny is, I got to be honest, I had no idea that there was special education, right? And then like this is how like aloof I was, right? I did not know. I was in resource room the whole 9 yards, but I did not realize that I was receiving special education services, right? I only figured that out, and this is kind of, I think it's funny. Maybe it's a little embarrassing. I only figured that out when I was in school getting my master's degree, because we were going over, like 12 years later, right? I was like 26, right? And this happened. Yeah. This is how I figured it out. I was going through an IEP. I was understanding in class. We talked about that before we got on. An IEP is an Individualized Education Plan. So every single kid who has special education services has an IEP. And this is how I put this together. I realized that in order to be in the resource room, you have to have an IEP, which means that you have to have special education services. So I was like, oh, I was in resource room. Oh, I had an IEP. So like immediately put that together. I put it together in class.
Yeah.
Everyone thought it was kind of like funny. And
wild.
yeah, and I got in my car after class. It was commuting. It was just my master's degree. I called home. I was like, "Hey, Mom, did I have an IEP?" She's like, "I don't know. What is that?" And I was like, "Did you have any paperwork?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh yeah, I kept all your paperwork," and I got to go home and read my IEP. I got
From
to
ninth grade.
from you know what? I don't remember what grade it was from. It was because I had one in it was the end of ninth grade, and then 10th and 11th.
But from high school.
From high school, yes.
Yeah.
I got to read it, and it was interesting. I mean, it's pretty similar to what they look like now, but it was interesting to read it and see like what my services were and what my goals were. And it's this document that now, I mean, at the time I didn't write any, but I mean, I've written hundreds of them now, right? And I review them. That's my job. I review them and go over them now. But at the time, it's funny to just see my own IEP. I got to see my like strengths and my concerns and the whole 9 yards. So
that's wild.
Yeah.
I mean, let's talk a little bit about the components of an IEP and, also when, we talked about your experience of finding out that you were in special education classes.
Yeah.
I actually first want to dive into the stigma surrounding that.
Sure.
Because I think there is a cultural stigma. You hear jokes about people talking about short buses. You hear all of these things where, sometimes I feel like if a student is told that they need special education, it can affect them psychologically as well.
Yeah. First of all, I'm not one that gets offended easily. So like I get why people make jokes and it is what it is. I'm not one that makes those kind of jokes, but I think what upsets me the most about those kind of jokes is like typically the people that you're making fun of are like the sweetest, kindest people that are just like having a good time and enjoying life. Yeah. And it's like, I'm like, man, do you really need to punch down like that? Like they're just having a good time, Yeah. So it does bum me out when people, make like autistic jokes and short bus jokes and things like that. It's like, but the stigma of special education, I think it's better, but there definitely is a stigma. I can talk about my personal experience. Obviously, that's what we do, talk about personal experiences, but it's unfortunate that there's a stigma around special education because in my opinion, and I'm biased, but in my opinion, some of the best educators are special educators because we have to be so adaptable. We don't specialize in English or math or whatever. And sometimes we're really good at those areas. Like I'm pretty good with math up to a certain level. And in writing because of the services that I got. But at the end of the day, I'm really good at individualizing and, adapting education for a person, right? Like taking what's the class doing right now? Where is the struggle occurring? And how can I bridge that gap with an individual, So what's nice when you get special education is you usually get hooked up with some pretty talented individuals, but there is that stigma that like you're dumb, you're not, you're not smart, whatever it is. One of the things that I would do personally is because I receive special education services, that's something that I could talk to and be vulnerable about with both the students and the adult. And the other thing is
the parent or guardian, you mean?
Yes, parent. Yeah. Parent, guardian. Yeah. Thank you. Because there's many times where the school would recommend, we would recommend special education services and the parent would be very reluctant to accept them.
Would it be denial on their part? Like, no, my kid's fine.
Yeah, it could be that. It could be this. It could be just the stigma. Like, I don't want my kid to be made fun of. I don't want this. I don't want that. And some people just don't fully understand. They think that if you're in special education, you can't go to college, you can't graduate, and that's not how special education is. You know what I mean? There might be instances.
Like in fact, your kid has provided more resources with highly skilled and trained professionals who are trained to adapt to their specific learning needs. So one might ask, why wouldn't every student have an individual education plan?
Yeah, it's so the law states, and the laws, maybe the law needs to change, whatever. The law states that there's certain disability categories that can qualify for an individualized education plan. And even if you have a disability, it doesn't automatically guarantee you a plan. You can have ADHD or autism or anything else and not have not need special education services. there's kind of two things that need to happen. First, you need to be identified as someone who has a disability.
Okay.
And it needs to fall under, for special education, it needs to fall under 13 categories. There's 504 plans, which is something else that you can get. We can talk about that later, but sticking with special education, you have to fall under one of the specific categories, and there needs to be an educational impact on your ability to learn in the general education environment. Okay. So if you have autism or ADHD or something else, and you don't struggle in school, or it's not impacting your ability to learn, you're not going to get a plan. You have to actually be adversely affected, right? It's actually holding you back, and you could perform better. So then you are entitled to special education services and an individualized education plan. Why wouldn't everyone get it? I mean, yeah, in an ideal world, that'd be cool. I just think it's the resources that go involved. I mean, it would just be
expensive.
Yeah. I mean, I mean,
you hate to say it, but that's what it is. It's a money issue.
Yeah. And also, like, I mean, ideally, I mean, kind of a weird thing with special education is, especially when you're the educator, you're kind of like trying to work your way out of a job, meaning that the goal of special education is so the student doesn't need special education, right? The goal of special education is so they can access the educational requirements, so they can access the general education curriculum without supports, right? So you kind of, it's kind of this weird position where you want to help kids not need you.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want kids to depend on you. You want to give them independent skills so they can thrive, they can succeed, you know? So if a kid doesn't need, if a student doesn't need those services, they really shouldn't be getting them. They should be accessing the general education curriculum, you know?
I want to talk to you a little bit about just now teaching in that space. And, you know, you went to UConn, you did your master's in special education at Fairfield University.
Yes.
And Go Stags.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if you've been to the new stadium. It's awesome.
No, I've not. When was the new stadium?
I think like it's in the second year now.
Then no.
You ever want to come to a game, let me know.
Okay.
I know people.
All right. Yeah.
I live in Fairfield too.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful campus.
It's a beautiful campus.
Man, it's a beautiful school.
The only thing I don't like is when I go to games, the Fairfield prep kids are just like running around, and they kind of don't look both ways. But it's okay. But it's an awesome experience at the stadium if you ever want to go.
Definitely, that'd be awesome.
But you know, I want to talk about so you jump into the special education space as an educator. Yeah. And prior to that, you teach traditional education at Central High, right?
So I started as a paraprofessional. At Western Middle School in town, and I'm sorry, at Hamilton Avenue School, excuse me. Okay. And Western.
There's a lot of schools in this town.
There are a lot of schools in this town. I mean, I've technically worked at other ones, but for the summer school program, I've been at North Street, Coscob, Ham Ave, Western, Central.
Damn.
I think that might be it. And then oh no, actually technically Eastern, when Central a few years ago there was that earthquake, and then the school was deemed like not safe to be
really
in. Yeah, so for 2 weeks, well, one of the weeks we were on break, so one of the weeks we all the different grades got shipped out to different schools around campus, and we were at the 7th grade that year was at Eastern. It was actually, honestly, it was a really fun experience. Like it's obviously not ideal. It was only for a week, but it was a good, I felt like it was a really good bond.
Field trip.
Yeah, I mean, we still tried to have classes. It required a lot of independence of the kids, which I think helped mature some of my guys, at least, on the special education side of things. Really helped them kind of mature and be a little bit more independent, because they needed to. None of us knew the school, right? Like I didn't know how to get around the school. So like we kind of all needed to work together to figure out like where was the open classroom we could go work in, or where was the, you had a choice. Like it was only there for a week. We might have double booked your classes. Like, what do you think is the more important one to go to right now? It's not, those aren't decisions that 7th graders typically make. You know? So it was actually, not that I ever want to go through that again, or want anyone to go through that. I actually enjoyed that.
It was just a unique experience.
It was a very unique experience for sure.
So throughout your career, what were the things that you learned the most about yourself when you transitioned from general education to special education?
Well, I started, I was always special education.
You're always special education.
So paraprofessional is an aide, one-on-one. Well, it can be different, but I was always one-on-one because I was always with the students that were the most physically aggressive because I can handle them.
Okay.
Right? So I was just, that's what I did. Behaviors, lots of behaviors. But there were a lot of lessons coming from that individual one-on-one support to a special education role where I suddenly had, I my first year being a full bore teacher, I was in Hawaii, and
I want to talk about that.
Yeah. And I had a homeroom of 20-something kids.
How did you end up in Hawaii?
When I was graduating, I wanted to work. I really wanted to move to San Diego. I had or Southern California. Like I had this whole, idea of what that would be like. And I had an opportunity to check out Hawaii. And I was like, well, that's really nice weather too. I'm sure I'll enjoy that. And kind of just, jumped and did
Which island?
Kauai.
Okay.
Kauai. Have you been?
Yeah, I've been to Maui. I've been to Honolulu.
That's on Oahu.
That's Oahu. So I've been to Oahu and I've been to Maui.
Yeah.
And that's it. So you were on Hawaii. Is that the big island?
No, Kauai.
Kauai. Okay.
Yeah. Kauai. Hawaii is also the big island. Yes. Yeah. There's Hawaii, the major islands, right? Don't nobody from Hawaii kill me. The bigger islands, right? That occupy that have a lot of people is the Big Island, Hawaii. There's Maui, Oahu. Oahu's where Honolulu is. That's
where I was.
That's most people. Waikiki. That's very famous. And then Kauai is the smallest of the major islands.
Okay, I love Maui.
Yeah,
that's like my favorite.
Maui's fun. Places. They're all great. They all have a kind of a uniqueness to them. That I love. I mean, I loved it out there. The nice thing about being a teacher, and at the time, not having any. Well, I still don't have any kids, but like I don't have didn't have any kids. It's easy to just move around, right? Yeah. There's, especially special education, there's such a need for special educators that it's pretty easy. Like if I wanted to right now, I'm pretty confident I can go get a special education job somewhere in the area. Like somewhere they need a special education teacher within 25 miles of here. I guarantee it,
So what was that experience like in Hawaii?
Awesome. So different. So I was one-on-one with kids, and then suddenly I'm in front of a group of 20 kids. And so I was really good at rapport building, which going back to, kind of going full circle here with the teachers, like the impactful teachers when you're younger, I realized that in order to teach a kid, you have to build rapport with them.
They have to trust you.
They have to. Like, I mean, it's like eating and drinking and getting enough sleep at night. You need to trust your teacher. And it's like, I think that's a basic need, a basic component of being a good educator, right? Just like you need that. So what was nice about all of my experiences working one-on-one with kids is, I had to connect with kids that couldn't speak. And these guys can all speak for the most part. So it made it easier in that side of things. However, my classroom management of 20 kids was like, what is happening here? Like that was new. So I had to adjust to that on the fly. So thankfully I could leverage my ability to build rapport with kids very quickly in order to shift into a role of being in front of a bunch of kids. Because that first year I was a co-teacher, meaning that there was a general education teacher and a special education teacher in the same room teaching a class. And I co-taught sixth, 7th, and 8th grade science with a science teacher. And I don't know anything about science. I failed my science classes. Like I was not, it was not great. But again, that wasn't my job in the room. My job wasn't necessarily to teach science. My job was to connect gaps with kids that couldn't understand what was going on in the curriculum. Right. And that's what I did. And I was very upfront about that with my co-teachers. I'm like, listen, I would read and learn and do what I need to do. But that wasn't my role. My role was implementing the IEPs and making sure that the kids could understand. So that was...
How long were you out there for?
I was out there for 4 years. Wow. I was a special education teacher for 3 of those years. And my final year, I was an autism consulting teacher. Sorry, I had to remember what that was called. And I was in charge of all of these schools on the west and south side of Kauai. So I had 30-something plus kids on my caseload.
You would go Bounce to school
to school of all the students that had an autism diagnosis, and some other ones that were kind of that had some kind of bigger behavioral issues as well. But mainly the vast majority were students with autism. So I would go and support the teams and basically help with decision making, data collection, how to work with those guys, that kind of thing. So that was a really fun experience for sure.
I have a question. So like you know, after those 4 years, you end up coming back here.
Yeah.
And did you assume a similar role here in the school system?
I was a special education teacher when I came back here.
Okay.
Yeah. So not that ACT position.
Not the ACT position,
No.
but just
Yeah. So in the classroom again, you know, having my own resource room, they call it academic lab in town. And I implemented IEPs. I wrote the IEPs. I conducted evaluations. I wrote up evaluation reports. I not so much here, but in Hawaii, I led those meetings. Here, I was a big part of those meetings. They usually have the administrators here lead them, so it's a slightly different process.
Can you compare and contrast those two experiences?
Oh,
because
yeah.
I think obviously demographics, culture, obviously such a stark contrast between here in Greenwich, Connecticut, and the west side of the island.
Kauai. Yeah, no, I mean,
of Kauai.
You literally couldn't get to. It couldn't be more opposite, right? I mean, you're talking about Greenwich, Connecticut, in Fairfield County, which, you know, was one of the richest places on the planet, versus the west side of Kauai. It's like, you know, it's lower income, it's isolated.
Yeah.
You know, if something happens out there, like, you know, if either you take care of it or you have some friends, thankfully, like it's you know, you're not calling anybody to, you know, you're not calling AAA or something, right? Like you're on your own. You know, I learned a lot of things out there. As far as the kids though, I moved somewhere that I knew nothing about. I didn't know how to surf. I didn't know about living in a warm climate like that, 365 days a year. I had to learn about that. But those kids, unfortunately, there are a lot of people like me who move out there, work there for a few years and leave. And that is their norm. So they are very, very reluctant, especially by the time they're in middle school, to open up to you, to trust you. So, I mean, the most extreme example I can give is it took me a year with one of the kids for him to finally accept me as like a teacher, right? But most of them, it took about 6 months. And honestly, the change that happened was who's now
all teachers or just the special education teachers?
All teachers. And some teachers, they don't ever trust. Like some teachers, they will make people's lives very difficult.
They'll make it difficult for them.
Very difficult.
Because they're like, you know, you're going to be gone in a year.
Right.
You're going to be gone 2 years.
Right. I mean, I'll say this, like, because kids have told me, so I'm going to say this from my own experience. I knew kids that would literally say that they drove somebody to quit and somebody to like leave the island. They didn't, right? It had nothing to do with them, but that was their mindset. That's some of those kids would literally celebrate the fact that they made somebody's life. Yeah, they made their lives so bad. They made their lives so difficult in the classroom that they left, right? And that's firsthand experience. I'm not just saying
so that super high turnover.
Yeah,
made it.
Well, even if you are like, I could eventually connect with the kids.
Yeah,
but I ended up leaving, right? And so you can have really good teachers that do connect with the kids, but eventually they leave, you know. And there's a lot of teachers that do that they have a very high turnover rate. So it's very hard to trust. So building rapport is even more important, and it's hard because they're going to trust you, and then you leave, and you know it's tough. It feels bad on all accounts, right? And just recognizing that.
You still keep in touch with some of those students?
Yeah. So what I was going to say, the turnaround for me was actually jiu-jitsu. My coach, my professor out there, Noah, who's since moved to Seattle, he opened a gym out there. It was this foundation. I think they're still around, the Keala Foundation, and they offered free CrossFit and jiu-jitsu to any kid on that island, 17 or younger.
That's awesome.
No questions asked. If you are, it might have been 18 or under. If you're in school on that island, it's just free, straight up. No, like that's it. No questions asked. So but the jiu-jitsu class that Noah ran, it was a combined adult and kids class because we only had the time for one. So there would be 40 people on the mats with, 70% of them being kids. And thankfully, it's very much a warrior culture out there, right? The kids love to fight. They would show me videos of them fighting, and I'm like, bro, you can't show me this. Like, stop showing me this. But like, you got nice hands, right? I'm like, you can't be doing this, right? And these kids are all over 18 now, so don't. But I finally, they would always be like, oh, mister, you want to fight? Like, you like scrap? And I'd be like, come to jiu-jitsu. Like, come. Like, I will gladly train with you. Like, come. So finally, one of the biggest knucklehead, and he was my boy, so I'm gonna call him knucklehead. He was very difficult to work with, but he was a big boy. He showed up, and all of his friends showed up to watch. And we
like the alpha. It's like you win him over. Like you have.
It's exactly what it was. Yeah. And we rolled. And I've been training for like 8 years at that point. I lovingly tossed him up and down that mat, and he loved it. He was like, "This is the best thing ever." He comes back, and a whole slew of them start showing up. But literally, it was the next day. All of them were super respectful.
That's awesome.
All of them.
They're probably like, this Connecticut guy. What's he going to do?
Yeah.
And you just showed them.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's such a cool bond that you have with
It was
your
fantastic.
students.
Yeah. I loved it.
And that's different than up here where students stay, they serve their tenure. And I mean, obviously, like there's pensions and whatnot involved. But at the end of the day, you were co-teaching with your teacher.
Yeah.
So there is that stability and that we offer here, obviously. Greenwich is known for having a great public school system.
Yes.
So, now you're home, and obviously the theme of my podcast is finding purpose, and it's clear that you found a purpose in special education and becoming an advocate for it. When did that start? Where you're like, you know what? I'm enjoying doing this, but there's so much more that I could be doing.
Yeah. So I'd been thinking about being an advocate actually before I even started teaching. Now, I didn't think that I could be an effective advocate without being a teacher first, but it always kind of was just like in the back of my mind. And the reason being is I had been in meetings with advocates that I just thought weren't as effective as they could be. And a lot of the times it's because they just didn't know the inner workings of a school. A lot of advocates are parents of kids who went through the system, and that's extremely valuable, a perspective that I don't have. But it's like anything, you if you work on the inside, you kind of know how things work. You know what people mean when they say certain things. You know the laws. You know the laws. You know how to like prod and poke. And I'm not a lawyer, just to be clear about that. But you understand what needs to happen, right? Or how things are happening. So when I was in Hawaii, I was thinking about being an advocate, and then after COVID, the special education teacher position is very difficult. It's got a lot of burnout. It's got that position in and of itself within the school system has, I think, the most burnout. I mean, I don't have a statistic off the top of my head, but I would bet that is probably the role that has a lot of turnover. Mm-hmm. Because the expectations, and my general education teachers are going to hate me for saying this, but I stopped caring because this is the reality. Yeah. The amount of work that is on a special education's teacher's table is just astronomically higher than everybody else.
Because they're individualized education plans.
Yes.
Not a general education plan.
And like the thing is, an English teacher may have to grade a bunch of essays, and that's time consuming. Sure. A math teacher may have to grade a lot of tests. You can get creative with like how you grade them and make it a little faster. But yeah, those are time consuming. But the thing is, if I mess up grading somebody's essay, that kid or that adult, the parent, can come to me and be like, hey, why did they get this grade? And I can reread it and I can say, you know what? I messed up there. You're right. They actually deserve an A instead of an A minus. Let me go fix that in the grade book. No big deal, right? But if I mess up an IEP, I risk getting people sued, right? Because it's a legal document. Like if I mess that up, I risk I risk costing the district money, right? So the kind of the room for error is a lot smaller.
Yeah.
And you're working with kids that are struggling, right? You're not getting an IEP if you're doing fine in school. And let me rephrase that. You're not getting an IEP if you're doing great in school, right? Like it's you have to be struggling in some area, in some facet, and that in and of itself is difficult. So there's just a lot of paperwork.
I mean, aside from that, also it's the repercussions that it will directly have on a student.
Absolutely,
and
yes,
where it's, there's a lot more pressure to make sure that you're filling in the gaps for them.
Yeah.
Whereas, a general student, they have their peers that they could actually lean on to fill in those gaps, or, like there's other. I feel like there's since they're more socialized in a way, like they can lean on a coach. They can lean on there's that general support where they have, where for you it's so individualized, where like they also are, after you build the rapport, they lean very heavily into that relationship.
Very much so. Very much so. And thankfully I had a lot of life experiences that I could relate to the kids on, and that's how I was able to build rapport with them. I mean, musical background, jiu-jitsu from an athletic background, just education in general. I always told the kids about their IEPs and talked to them about their plans, so they weren't like me and had no idea.
Yeah.
But what was happening my final year that kind of ended things was I was getting pulled from meetings constantly. And it got to a point where I was out of the classroom the majority of the time, to the point where my kids would literally be like, "Hey, Mr. Coletti, are you going to be teaching us today?"
Yeah.
Because I was getting pulled out that much. And like kids like subs, right? It gives them a break. But it got to a point where they even were like tired of it.
Because
right?
the thing they need is consistency.
Yeah. And it got so bad that they literally would like celebrate when I got to stay. Right. And kids love subs. Like kids want substitutes so they can screw around. It got so bad that they got tired of having subs. That's how much I was out of the classroom. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not even teaching these kids anymore. Like what am I doing? This is not what I signed up for. I can do this and be much more effective outside of the school, because you have to be careful what you say when you're a teacher. You have to be careful that you don't say the wrong thing, and there's retaliation. You could get if you're not tenured, and I wasn't tenured yet, you can get fired, right? Like those things can happen to you, and they can just do it. It's kind of crazy the power that they have to just kind of like make life difficult for you,
Yeah.
So you have to be very careful. As an advocate, I say whatever I want at a meeting now. You can't.
It also gives you an opportunity to represent the broader interests.
Yeah.
Which, I think is so important that there are advocates doing that, especially with your experience both in the classroom, one-on-one, when you were working as a paraprofessional.
Yes.
I was going to say intern,
Yeah.
paraprofessional. And so you bring that breadth of experience to the advocacy, where that differentiates you from the parents who are advocates because they're passionate about it, because their children are in it, but they don't know the intricacies of what goes into the IEP and how to build a program and how to maintain the programming for an individual student, which offers so much in that space. I do want to talk to you about so with the jiu-jitsu, with the music, and one underlying theme that I feel like touches both of those worlds, with respect also to your experience in special education, is the need for discipline, the need for patience, and the need for empathy. I think that that encompasses like a lot of, frankly, your life's work up to this point. Talk to me a little bit about those three things.
I think that's a great way to put it. And I never really thought about it before. I think the thing about playing an instrument, about doing an athletic endeavor in general, but specifically something as challenging as jiu-jitsu as it is to like grapple another human being, and then working with kids, is you can't buy the skills. You can buy the best guitar on the planet, doesn't mean you can play it well. You could go to the, it's obviously great to go to a great gym that has a great coach, but like you need to put in the time to get better at that thing. The same thing with kids. There's nothing, you can buy a kid all the things that they want, but it's not going to do anything for your relationship with them. It's not going to do anything for your ability to actually work with them, right? So I think the kind of the through line with all those different endeavors is that it takes time and failure and learning from your failure just over and over again. If I could go back and work with the kids that I very first worked with, I'm very confident that I would be 100 times more efficient and effective with those kids that I started working with like 17 years ago or 18 years ago than I would be now, you know? And I have the confidence that in 20 years from now, the same would be true about the kids that I'm working with now, you know? Like I believe that there's just a constant, you need to constantly evolve and constantly improve and constantly self-reflect on the things that you do wrong and be honest with yourself. Like be honest that you messed up and it's okay. Just fix it, learn from it, and move on, you know? And the same thing is true about, music and jiu-jitsu, right? Like jiu-jitsu is the easiest and most glaring because when you mess up, you know, you tap out obviously, but like your arm gets broke or you get choked out, right? Or your leg gets, you tear your ACL. Like there's a very clear, or maybe not so extreme, but like you got taken down or you got knocked over. Those are very easy things to see. Like I did something wrong, right? Or I didn't do something right. However you want to look at it, right? Or they did something really well. Music's the same thing. Like, you play the right chord or you play the wrong chord. It doesn't sound great. But if you play the wrong chord, how can you adapt that and make it sound good? You know, like how do you mess around with the harmonies that were made that you can turn it into something productive, or practice so you don't make that mistake, whatever it may be. But I don't know if that's the, I guess it's the kind of the through line is the time and the effort and that goes patience, into all those things. Yeah. Patience. Yeah.
It's funny because, working in the special education space and the skill set that you've acquired, how do you apply that to, I don't want to say normal, but like in your day to day, because obviously like non-professional life, because sometimes I meet normal people and they demonstrate behaviors where I need the skills that you have, that you've developed through working with special needs or special education kids, where it's like, I don't have the patience and I don't have, like, I may not empathize, but like you're kind of trained to lead with those two things. So how has that just your work experience affected you just like in relationships in general?
What, in good and bad ways. Like, I mean, I am very patient, but like to a fault. Like working with kids, I've had to learn to be impatient sometimes. Like you have to draw a lot. You have to be able to set boundaries, right? And I've gotten a lot better at that now. But earlier on in my career, I wasn't really good at setting boundaries, right? In my personal relationships, I was kind of like, if somebody asked me to do something, like I would be like, all right, no problem, I'll just do it. And it's like, with no kind of consideration to how it's going to affect me or what I feel about it, and being able to set boundaries is huge. And that's kind of what you're doing when you teach kids. You're kind of telling them, like, especially kids with extreme behaviors, you're kind of letting them know what's acceptable and what's not. Like, hey, like you can't hit me. Like that's not an option, right? But how you react to it, if a kid hits you for the first time and it's not anything that causes damage, right? It's just, swats you on the leg or something. 99% of the time, if it's my first time working with that kid, I'm not even going to address it. I'm not even going to acknowledge that it happened because I don't know if he's ever going to do that again. If he does it a second time, I'm going to address it. But the thing is, if he did that one time, and let's say he was never going to do that again, which happens. Sometimes they just, they flare around, hit your leg. If I give a big reaction, if I'm impatient, they're going to say, ooh, I like that. Like what just happened there, right? Like he got really like big and like his voice got loud. Like I want him to do that again. Yeah. And they're going to hit me again.
Yeah.
And then if I react with big emotions again, it's like, ooh, I like this, right? It's something that could happen. So my default when a kid is doing something they're not supposed to do, just ignore them initially, right? And just like, hey, let's keep working, And then most of the time they don't do it again. So balancing that is important, right? Like, and then developing some impatience or developing the ability to create boundaries was kind of necessary for me in all facets of life.
Well, I think that translates to in a broader sense also, like when you give people a reaction, then they know how you're going to react, and they know how to push your buttons. And it's one of those things that people install, the people who can push your buttons are the ones who installed them.
Yeah.
It's very, translate very well in that, in the, what you just discussed, where it's like, once they know how to kind of play you, because they're, I think one of the misconceptions of anybody who I know who was in special education is highly intelligent. Okay, maybe I'm wrong.
I meant me.
Okay. Well, I don't know. Like, I feel like when it comes to just like my interactions with them, like they seem to like understand me at a different level, or read me at a different level.
We deal with behaviors a lot.
Yeah.
And what's that?
You're funny, the reaction for my comment right there. Yeah.
Maybe I don't know. Yeah. But no, we deal with behaviors. And when you deal with behaviors, one of the things you learn is everything we do is behavior. Like all our actions are behavior, right?
Yeah.
The fact that like, we're sitting here having a normal conversation instead of, I don't know, like breaking out into a fight or something. Like, these are all behaviors that we've learned over life. Like, I know to look at you. I know to speak into the microphone because I've done this before. This is a behavior I've done before. This is a skill that I've learned, right? Everything is a behavior. So when you understand that, it makes it a little easier. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's not like, it's just something that you kind of inherently understand when you work with kids and when you work in the field of special education, because it's just what we deal with all the time.
And you make it a point to like keenly notice these behaviors because that's part of your job.
Well, it depends, right?
Yeah.
So if I need to keenly, if it's a problem behavior, yes.
Yeah.
But in general, I mean, all kids have, it pertains to all kids, and I'm talking extremes right now. I mentioned like the headbutt and getting stabbed and things like that. Those are extremes because they catch your ear, like, oh my God, like that's crazy. But like even just a simple like, I don't want to do my homework today. Like I'm not Mr. C. I hated homework. Not doing my work, and I don't blame them, right? But like, hey, Mr. C, I'm not working today. It's not happening, right? I got to gauge, like, is this kid that does work for me every single day? I've had him for years now. And this is the first time that he's coming in my room and he's like, dude, I can't work today. You know what, dude? You're good. Like, can you do it at home later? Can you do it from home today? Yeah, like no problem. If this is a kid that does this every single day, it's a different response, right? You got to work with him differently.
Because it's a pattern.
Exactly. So you got to work with that. You got to understand. And then if it's a pattern, it's something I got to address. That's something then I need to pay attention to that more. But the thing is, when you're working with kids, with anything, like, you perceive your environment and you act upon it, right? Mm. And so when if I'm sitting there like trying to like hyper analyze everything that you're doing or that Miles is doing over here helping us out with the production, right? If I'm trying to shout out Miles, looking around, I would be overwhelmed. I wouldn't be able to process what's going on. So there is an opportunity to do those kind of things, but that's more in like a one-on-one situation. But I mean, it's kind of a more natural thing that you develop over time. Thankfully, the trajectory that I had is I started off one-on-one, so I could hyper-focus on you or the individual I was working with and start to make those connections. And then over time, my classes got bigger, so I can do that on a macro level, right? I teach kids jiu-jitsu and adults as well. I taught group classes, so you start to learn how to manage a group, and you realize like, the group is now off. And so it's not one individual I need to address, it's the group I need to address. And then that narrows it down, like who is the one individual that's kind of causing this. But initially you work with the group behavior, if you will. Mm. So nice. I don't know if that
it did. That totally made sense. The last thing I really want to jump into though is your business.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the work that you're doing there.
Yeah.
And how it was born.
So when I quit, I started the business the next day. I was planning on doing that. So I quit teaching and I opened my advocacy business literally the next day. I talked about it at the top of the show, but an educational advocate is someone who helps families navigate the special education system. And
you essentially an educational consultant?
It's very similar. I mean, you could use those words interchangeably.
Yeah.
I mean, you could use those words interchangeably. An advocate, though, so as a parent or a guardian of a child with an IEP or a 504 plan for that matter, it's a different thing, but an IEP, when you have a special education meeting in Connecticut, those are called PPT meetings, planning and placement team meetings. I always want to say parent every time I always think like PTA. It always takes me a second to think. But PPT meetings in New York, they're called CSEs, the Committee on Special Education. Every state kind of has like a different name for it, but it's basically a special education meeting. As a parent or a guardian, you have the right to bring an advocate with you. An advocate can literally be anyone, though. Right now, there's no certification or qualification to call yourself an advocate. So you can bring, your mom, your dad, grandpa, uncle, coworker, friend, whoever. The only requirement is that they have some kind of knowledge of the child. So you can bring anyone with you. And if you're a parent out there and you have a child with an IEP, I highly recommend you always bring someone with you. You don't necessarily need to hire an advocate, right? Obviously, I'm biased. I think you should have an advocate, but not every situation needs one. Knock on wood, most of the situations, you get a good teacher, whatever, you don't need an advocate. But it's always good to bring someone with you just to take notes.
Yeah.
Because those meetings, they get emotional. I mean, one of the things that I make sure when I was a teacher, I always made sure that there was a box of Kleenex, of tissues, tissues on the table and a garbage can nearby. Always. Because it just gets emotional. You're talking about your kid and you are talking about difficulties.
They're worried about them.
Of course, it's natural, it's normal, but they're uncomfortable conversations because you're not in there. I mean, it can be a positive meeting. It can be gung ho and everybody's good, but you're still talking about your kid struggling, and that's tough, right? And again, I don't have that perspective. I'm not a parent yet, but I can only imagine how difficult it is to essentially have to accept and then work on a struggle that your kid's having, because you don't want your kid to struggle. You don't want your kid to have, issues or need support. You want them to be like everybody else, right? And in this case, in those kind of meetings, they're not. I've had some really uncomfortable situations that are. It sucks in those meetings, but you kind of like. I'm not one to BS anybody. I will say it as nicely as I can, but I will also tell the parents straight up, like, listen, your kid has dyslexia, or your kid is like, they are struggling here. We can help, but this is the reality, right? But sometimes you just have to be blunt like that. It gets to a point where it's like, listen, man, this is the reality of the situation, and it's hard, right?
So you're able to be there and essentially remove emotion from the conversation and convey the interest of the student.
Sorry. Yeah, I kind of went off on a tangent there. Yes. That's
that's cool. I just want my audience to know.
Yeah,
because at the end of the day, they listen to this, they might be thinking about their own kid.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can be there and represent the interests of their kids, convey their interests along with the best interests of their children to these boards so that their kid gets the care and the educational support they need. I think that's so important.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of entails, like what I do anyways, as far as how I conduct myself, it entails a record review. So I'll go through all of their records, their IEPs, evaluations, progress reports, report cards. These are all things that, any work samples. And then I will work with the family to understand what they want. What do we need to get? What's in the best interest of your child? What's appropriate? That's the language, is free and appropriate public education. What's an appropriate education plan for them? And then if they would like me to, I go to the meetings with them and support. Yeah. Some parents it depends. What happens at the meeting kind of depends. If some parents are really, they just need a little support behind the scenes, and I'm there to like kind of catch anything weird that happens, but they'll do the majority of the talking. And I have some parents where I'm doing the vast majority of the talking at the meeting because it is what it is. It's a very tricky case kind of thing, but I'm basically there to ensure that the meeting is conducted appropriately. And if anything weird happens, I can catch that real quick. Yeah. Because, sometimes they are, I'm working with, I don't want to, if I name who it is, it'll people will know who it is, but like I'm working with a family right now, and their kid is getting they receive. So this is kind of the language of the IEP. They receive 2 times 30 minutes a week, right? So 2 sessions, 2 30-minute sessions of OT, occupational therapy, and they also receive 2 times 45 minutes a week of speech therapy. So twice a week, 45-minute sessions of speech therapy, right? Mm-hmm. And then a bunch of other stuff too. Like there's physical therapy, there's the actual special education instruction, there's the behaviorist on the team. So this child needs a lot of support and they get a lot of different services. I read the IEP, and those teachers, those service providers are co-treating the child, which in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with that. I've co-taught. I think it's a great model. The parents love the way that they work with their kid. But now here's the issue. And they thought this was an issue too, but they kind of didn't really question it too much. And I was like, this is not okay. I was saying, well, they're co-treating. Does that mean they're getting 4 sessions, or are they just coming in for the 2 sessions together? And they're like, they're just coming in for the 2 sessions together. So that kid's effectively getting half the amount of time that he should be getting. He should be getting
30 and 30.
He should be getting 2 of OT and 2 of speech, and they're combining, right? Yeah. So he's only getting 2 of both total, right? He should be getting 4, right? And that's not a small thing, right? Like those are the times where you're getting actual special education instruction, where you're getting the services that you need. So like immediately I'm like, dude, we need to divide these. We need, yeah. And, or they need to co-treat for the amount of, like they need to service him for
2.5 hours of time.
Yeah. Essentially. And he's getting half that, right? Yeah. And so I don't mind the co-treat model. If you guys want to co-treat, I'd go for it. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but you need to provide the amount of time. Yeah. That needs to happen. That's just an example of something that like I would catch at a meeting. I'm like, whoa, wait a minute.
Yeah.
We I don't want to take away the opportunity for co-taught, but this kid needs to get the services that they're supposed to get. Other things that you're not supposed to do, it's an individualized education plan. Meaning that, let's say you have an IEP, I have an IEP, Miles has an IEP as he walks in the room. We all need to have, all of them need to look different, right? Even if let's say we all have dyslexia, right? Even then, it needs to look different. It needs to talk about what you're good at, what I'm good at, what the concerns are for you, what the concerns are for me. It has to be different. It has to be individualized.
That makes sense.
But it also needs to be individualized year to year. So your IEP from last year can't be copied and pasted into the next one. And that's something that happens quite often as well. Things are copied and pasted from year to year. And that's not okay either. The plan needs to be appropriate and updated.
Yeah.
You are so different from when you're 7 to 8 to 9 to 10. You're like a different person every year, right? So that's just another like simple example. But these are the kind of things that like I will go through with a fine-tooth comb and catch. And I'm not playing the gotcha game. I'm playing hey, let's fix this so we can make sure that this plan is appropriate going forward, and then not do this again.
With the kids' interests at the forefront.
Then that's what it's all about.
Yeah,
that's what it's all about. And I, when things get heated, sometimes that is something that I will bring it back to.
Yeah. I kind of want to like bring everything full circle. Dude, I really admire the work that you do. I admire your career and just like, your journey and what you're doing now is just super powerful and very, very needed in communities here, but communities everywhere. But I do want to end with my rapid fire question.
Okay.
Which is,
oh geez,
it's just literally
I didn't
one
see this
question. It used to be 5 and I was just 1.
What's the 5? I feel like okay. Let me get the one.
I downsized. But what advice would you give to someone on the journey of finding their purpose?
Take your time. Take your time. Don't rush life. I think I've learned that. I think moving to Hawaii was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because I learned to just slow down and appreciate every day. I always used to kind of live for the weekend kind of thing. And, Monday to Friday, you got to get through it. You grind. It is what it is. And then you can enjoy yourself on the weekend. You can have a good time on the weekend. Try to find enjoyment on a daily basis. That doesn't mean don't work or anything like that, right? You got to put in the work, but realize that there's value to every single day. Every single day can be work. Every single day can be break. Every single day can can encapsulate a positive experience, right? And sometimes it's a bad day. It is what it is. You know, those happen, right? Just get to bed, get up the next day. There's always, just don't rush. Don't rush through life. There's no race. There's no like, you have to do it by a certain age. You know, I've had a few experiences now where it's like, I've had to accept that, like, you know what, it is what it is. It'll happen when it happens. It's okay.
I love that. Nick, appreciate you. Please just tell my audience how they can reach you.
Yeah.
Information about your business, and you know, I'm just really grateful for you to being here.
Dude, thank you so much for letting me on. I this has been awesome. If you need advocacy services, my business is you can find me at www.greenwichseadvocates.com. If you want to check out my podcast, I also host a podcast.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, usually, I actually haven't figured out. You always sit in that chair? Is that I've been like bouncing back and forth. I really haven't found a chair yet. You know,
I sat in this one, episode 1, and it's just stuck, man.
Just yeah. I'm still trying to figure it out. Like, I kind of like going back and forth. You know, keep the audience on their toes. It's called the Sped Space. You can check me out. I'm also on Spotify, Apple, and all the other, you know, places that you can find your podcast. And one last thing. I know that my business is Greenwich Special Education Advocates. I work outside of Greenwich. To be very clear. After I made that, I learned very quickly that the most common question I get for Greenwich residents is like special education questions, and the most common question I get from non-Greenwich residents is, do I work outside of Greenwich? So yes, I work outside of Greenwich. And I think that's it. Yeah.
All right, love that. Please, I invite everybody to please listen, rate, and review this episode. Share it with a friend. Share it with a family member. Share it with anybody who would be impacted by this conversation. And I'm super grateful for everyone who's following. Follow me at @AdamVora_. That's my personal email, or at the Finding Purpose Pod on Instagram. Available on Apple, Spotify, and everywhere you consume podcasts. Thank you so much. Special shout out to my guy Miles.
Thanks, Miles.
The producer of this thing.